To implement the chat features of the application, let's start on the server side, where I currently have a hub with a method called hello, but when users are chatting, they usually don't want to just say hello all the time. Instead, they want to send messages. So I'll have a send method that takes a message, and because this is a public method on my hub, I will be enabling some piece of JavaScript code to walk up to an object and do .send and pass a string parameter. And what the SignalR client libraries will do is package up that information, send it to me here on the server over WebSockets or whatever communication channel it was able to establish, and it will arrive here in my hub where the send method will be invoked and I will be passed the message from JavaScript. And then I can do whatever work I need to do with that message, save it in a database, or in this case, distribute it out to all the clients. I can do that by saying clients.all dot, and then whatever method that I want here. Why can I type just any method? Because all is a dynamic property of clients. Because it's a dynamic object, I can type anything that I want here that's a legal method name. And what SignalR will be able to do through the magic of the dynamic language runtime is capture that method name and also capture the parameters being passed to that method and package it up into a bundle of information that will be distributed to all the clients that have connected to this hub. So somewhere in JavaScript code, there will be an object with a new message method, and when SignalR delivers this information, that method will get invoked and my parameter will arrive as a parameter to that method. And I don't want the parameter to always be hi, I want that parameter to be the message. Or actually, I could do something a little more interesting. Because we're using Windows authentication and all of our users are authenticated, I should be able to get their name. I can do that by going to the SignalR context property that's available here inside of a hub. That's similar to an HTTP context because it contains lots of information about this particular message. One of the things I can do is walk up to a user property, get the user identity, and then get the username, just like I can do in an MVC controller, user.identity.name. And I can build a string that says, so-and-so says, and then add the message. And that's what I'll send down to all users. So there's a bit of dynamic programming here because we are interfacing with JavaScript effectively. SignalR makes it look like a remote procedure call, but really what's happening when I invoke new message is information is being packaged up, perhaps being sent over WebSockets back down to the client where it's going to invoke that method on a JavaScript object. And we'll be able to see that in just a bit because the next piece that we need to work on is our client-side implementation, the view and the JavaScript. So let me create a scope to keep everything out of the global scope. And inside of here, I want to get a reference to the hub. I can do that through $.connection. Because SignalR is a jQuery plugin, it augments the jQuery object, which is the $, and it will add a connection property to the jQuery object. Through that connection object, I can get a reference to the various hubs that I might have on the server. And because I have a hub called perfhub, I'll have a property here called perfhub. But in order for that to work, I do need one additional script. I need a script whose source will point somewhere that is not a script that is on disk. Instead, it will point to an endpoint that SignalR listens to. And if I take this path and use it in the browser, we can see exactly how SignalR responds. And it responds with JavaScript, which is good because I have a script source pointing here. And if you've ever worked with WCF web services and JavaScript proxies for WCF web services, then the concept I'm about to explain will seem very familiar. Because what SignalR will do when I hit this endpoint is give me JavaScript code that generates proxies for my hubs. So it will generate a proxy for perfhub that will make the public methods of perfhub available on that JavaScript object. And I can see that if I scroll down in this file at the very bottom, or almost at the bottom, I can see there's an object called perfhub. And perfhub will be available through $.connection. This perfhub object will have a hello method that takes no parameters. And where does the hello come from? Well, back on the server, I have not done a build of this project as yet, and this method used to be called hello. Now it's called send, and it takes a string parameter. If I do a build and come back to the browser and refresh, we'll see the proxy has been updated. It now has a send method that takes a parameter called message. And as I keep adding methods, SignalR will continue to generate this proxy by looking through the project and reflecting over the hubs. And the other thing that I'll point out is that this send method is available off of a server property off of perfhub. So once I have a perfhub in JavaScript, if I say perfhub.server.send, that's going to communicate using signal R back to the server and invoke a method on my hub. But we're not quite there yet. A couple other things to set up. A little more bookkeeping. The other thing that I want to do with the connection is walk up to a hub property and enable logging. That will give me some diagnostic information in the JavaScript console of my browser's developer tools, where I can see what Signal R is doing behind the scenes. And then the last piece that I need is to tell Signal R to start communicating, establish a connection with the server, and figure out the best way to communicate with the hubs on the server. That start is asynchronous. It could take a couple milliseconds to open up the communication conduit. It could take a couple seconds. It does return a promise that I can use to register code to know when that is complete and successful. But I'm going to assume for this demo that that can happen relatively quickly. The other piece of bookkeeping that I want to do is I want to go ahead and add to my perfhub client object a new property called newMessage that will point to a function that takes a message parameter. What I'm doing here is writing the method that will get invoked when my hub says clients.all.newMessage. I want this method, which you can think of almost like an event handler here, because it will get invoked when that new message arrives. And inside of here, I'll need to take that message and somehow get it to the screen. And the way I'll manage the screen is using knockout. So I want to use knockout to data bind JavaScript objects to a view, which is the HTML that we're going to create in just a bit. And I won't explain a lot of the knockout concepts in detail because we do have lots of courses covering knockout on Pluralsight. But when you use knockout, you typically create a view model in JavaScript, and then you bind that view model to the UI. I'll do that by creating a model. This model is my constructor function for the view model. I'll save off the this reference into a variable called self. That's something that you'll see quite a lot of in JavaScript code. When JavaScript programmers want to preserve the this reference, no matter how many callbacks they have inside of a function, you can always rely on self to actually point to the object that you started with. And it just becomes a matter of convention where you place this at the top of every method, regardless of whether you're going to use it or not, because it creates some consistency. And I can now say things like self.message. I want that to be a new property here. So I need two properties, I think. One is message. That's going to data bind to some input, and it's going to represent the message that the user wants to send to the server. I can start that off by being an observable object, a knockout observable that has an initial value of an empty string. And the other property I'm thinking about is a messages property that's going to contain all the messages that get sent from the server. That's going to need to be an array. And for now, I think that's the only two properties that I need. I'm also going to need some behavior, I believe. So I will wire up a prototype object for this constructor function. And the two pieces of behavior would be, one, I need something that when the user clicks on the send button, that can be bound to my model and invoke a function here that will send a message to the server. So that's a method that could look like sendMessage as a function, where I will save off the this reference again, and then I will go to the perf hub. Remember, it has a server property, and that server property as part of the proxy will have a send method available. And I can pass in my message. Signal R will be able to grab that and send it up to the server. And once that is sent to the server, I could clear out the message and set it to an empty string. Once the data binding is set up, that should clear out the text box that the user typed into. And the other bit of behavior that I'm thinking of is something to add a message to the model when a new message arrives from the server. And this could be as easy as just saying self.messages.push that new message. And again, through the magic of data binding, that should then just appear on the screen. I'll need to create an instance of this model. And then when the DOM is ready, I will need to tell knockout to apply bindings to take my view model and start binding it against the view. And the last piece that I think I need is I need to call add message at the appropriate time. So in this event handler, in this new message method, when I receive a message from the server, I should just be able to walk up to the model, tell it to add this message. And that might be all the JavaScript code that we need to write. Now let's go over and create the view for all of this. So I will create a div with a class of row, a bootstrap row, and I think I'll lay this out in 2 columns, although it might be 3 columns, but we'll start with 2. So a div with a class of column medium 4, take up 1/3 of the screen. In here I can place my input, type equals text, where the user can type the message that they want to send. It should probably have a label associated with it, but I'll just use a placeholder. And I want to data bind this, data bind the value of this input to the message property in my view model. And then I'll need a button that the user can click on to send that message. We can make it appear a little bit prettier by making it a button primary. That will give it a nice blue color with Bootstrap with the default theme, and use knockout to data bind the click event to that send message method that I made available on the model object. That should be everything that I need to send a message. Now I just need a place to display the messages. So another div, column medium 4. This one will need to loop through all of the messages. So please data bind with a for each expression to my messages collection. And for each message, display a div that will data bind the text property to the string that is the message. So just a little bit of knockout here. When you're doing a for each expression against an array of primitive types like strings, in order to get to each individual item, you can use $data inside of the for each expression. That will be the string that represents each individual message. And I think I've reached a point where I can build this project and we can take a look at it in Chrome. Before I refresh this and get the updated script, I will open up the developer tools and go to sources and make sure that the console is displaying. And now do an F5. And I can see some Signal R diagnostic stuff scroll down here through the bottom. It looks like it's going to work. Let's send a test message. And indeed that works. It comes out here in the list of messages that have been sent from the server. But to truly see if this is working or not, let's open up another browser, perhaps Internet Explorer, where I will have to log in again. And then I also want to open up the developer tools here and view the console. Let me refresh this again so we get all the messages. And now let me send a message from IE. That should appear immediately in Chrome. And that's the beauty of Signal R. I send a message to the server from one browser. It gets pushed out to everyone who's listening in real time, and they retrieve that data very quickly. Let's look at what's happening inside the console really quick. It's sort of interesting. This is where Signal R is trying to negotiate a connection with this web server. You can see it's connecting to a WebSocket endpoint, and then the next bit of output is something went wrong. And the problem here is this. Chrome does support WebSockets, but WebSockets plus Windows authentication, not so much. This version of Chrome just doesn't support that. So Signal R was unable to establish a WebSocket connection. It closed the WebSocket, and then it fell back to using server-sent events. And it looks like server-sent events connected successfully. So Chrome is using SSE. Internet Explorer version 10, if I look at the console output here, I can see there were no errors, and the WebSocket was open, and we're actually communicating with WebSockets over IE. And that's another beauty of Signal R, the abstraction it provides over these connections, its ability to change communication protocols when something doesn't work. And that's a big help when you want to use this technology, which WebSockets aren't supported on all browsers, but Signal R effectively makes it look like they are. So now that our chat application is built, let's do something a little more advanced and try to push out performance counter data.